And in righteousness he judged and waged war. His eyes are like the flame of fire, and on his head are many crowns. He had a name written on himself, which nobody know except himself. And he is clothed in a robe dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And the armies which are in heaven were following him on a white horses, clothed in fine linen, white and clean. And from his mouth proceeds a sharp sword, that with it he may smite the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron. And he treads the winepress of the wine of the anger of the wrath of God the Almighty. And he has on his robe and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the birds flying in mid-heaven, Come, gather for the great supper of God, that you may eat the flesh of the kings and the flesh of the commanders of 1,000 troops, and the flesh of the strong, and the flesh of horses, and of those sitting on them, and the flesh of all, both freeman and slave, the small and great. And I saw the beasts and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered to make war against one sitting on the horse and against his army. And the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet who performed the signs before him, by which he deceived those who receive the mark of the beast and who worship his image. These two were caught alive into the lake of fire, burning with sulfur. And the rest were killed with the sword of the one sitting on the horse, and the sword having proceeded from his mouth, and all the birds were filled with their flesh. What an event. Here John is seeing a scene that has not yet taken place. Literal, but not necessarily happening at this time. So in other words, John is seeing something that is to come. And so the angels show him in the first part of the verse the whole aspect of the feast. So remember, the first part was the fact that Doc explained that the bride would have come, look for the bridegroom rather, would have come and looked for his bride and went back to make preparation for his bride. And the fact that the bride is now prepared, and he returned now to receive the bride. And at this feast, an invitation was given for the people to come and join in this feast. Now, the latter part of the same chapter, you see now, John is shown another feast. But this time, who is feasting? Look at the chapter. Who is feasting at this time? Who is invited to feast? The The birds are invited to feast. In the first 10 verses, an invitation was given to join the feast of the Lamb. And there were celebration over the fact that God have triumphed over the wicked, over Babylon. Now in this case, in the second half of chapter 19, the birds are invited to this feast. And they are invited to the feast because this man who is riding on the horse is going to slay Satan and his kings and his commanders. And so the invitation is now given to the birds to come and feast on their flesh. And this imagery came from in John's time when war takes place. The body is left on the ground, and the birds would have come and eat the flesh. And so you'll see that the command is given that the scavengers will not only eat the men, but even the animals that they were riding. You see it? So you'll see there it says that in verse, let's pick it up on verse 17. It says, I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the birds flying in the mid-heaven, come, gather for the great supper of God, that you may eat the flesh of the kings and the flesh of the commanders of thousands, and the flesh of the strong, the flesh of the horses, and the flesh of those who are sitting on them, and all the flesh from the free man and the slave man. So the imagery here is shown that there'll be a lot of persons who will die. And the judgment is executed by God. Notice it says in verse 12 that who has an eyes like the flame of fire? Who you seeing there? It says what? Let's look at Revelation 14 and verse 1. Let's look at where it was picked up. In Revelation 1 and verse 14, what it says? No, sorry. Revelation 1 and verse 14. Did I say Revelation 14, 1? Oh, sorry. Revelation 1 and verse 14. And it says, his head and his ears were like what? White like wool. And it says, as white as what? Snow. And his eyes were what? Like a flame of fire. So who is this referring to? Huh? Jesus. So let's go back now to chapter 19 and look at verse 12. So let's pick it up from verse 11. And I saw heaven open. Now, John is seeing heaven open in this case, but he was not allowed to come in. So although heaven was open, the door was closed. Why? Why in this case? Let us read verse 11 and 12. And I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse, and one sitting upon it was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judged and waged war. His eyes are like the flame of fire, and on his head are many crowns. He has a name written on himself which nobody knows except him. In this case, you see that heaven is open. John is showing that heaven is open. But what is happening here? Look at the text. Previously in chapter 4, yes, you will see where John is showing that the door in heaven is open. In this case, no door was shown. Something was happened when heaven opened. What happened? very good, Sister Lee. Very good. The man on the horse was heading out. So this time in chapter 19, God is heading to earth. This man on the white horse, and we looked at Revelation 1 and verse 14, and we realized that is the same person with his eyes like the flame of fire. And what verse 13 says, and he is clothed in a robe dipped in blood. You're seeing that? Good. And his name is called what? The Word of God. And the army which are in heaven were following him on a what? White horses. So all the persons who were following him were all on what? White horses. And they all had what apart from horse being white? Their clothes were white with fine linen. And John emphasized a particular word there. What is that word? Apart from it being white, what else did he emphasize? Clean. Very good. So you can have a white, I didn't know that your clothes could be white, but not clean. Is it so? Yes, man. Yes, man. You can't have on a white clothes and it's not clean. So John emphasized that it's not only white, but it's clean. Very good. So you are seeing here a scenery in the second half of Revelation 19, that now the first part from verse 1 to 10, there's a celebration taking place. Because the saints of God is now going to celebrate because of the victory. Now John get a flip now, where heaven is open, and at this time, heaven door is closed. Because God, Jesus, is heading to earth. And he's heading to earth with his angels. I read somewhere in the article I'm reading that the army that come in with Christ are not necessarily angels alone, but some of the saints that are coming with Christ. Yes? Well, I don't know if that hold a very good argument, but very good question. Very good question. Because when you look at the passage, none of who was riding with the man on the horse had the job to execute judgment. It says only the man on the horse were the one that execute the judgment. So they were just coming as witnesses or to support. You understand? The fact that they are on the winning side. Remember now, this is talking about chapter 19, latter part is really looking at Armageddon war now. This is where the devil organizes troop on earth. Right? And he's putting his troop together. So you notice it said, the kings of the earth, the commanders of thousands. So in other words, this is when the devil organizes troop and is ready for this Armageddon war, this final war. And so now the Lord is prepared and is coming. So we can look at verse 14. All right, we read verse 14. Let us look at verse 15. It says, from his mouth pursued a sharp sword. Yes? That with it he might smite all nations, and he will rule them with the rod of an iron. That sounds familiar. Where do you think that came from? That rule with a rod of iron. Where do you think it came from? Let's just look at Isaiah 63, 1 to 6. Let me see if it came from somewhere there. Isaiah 63, and somebody can read for us verse 1 to 6. And let's see if it sounds familiar. Hold on, let somebody give you the mic.
Who is this that cometh from Edom,
Yes.
with dyed garments from Bozrah? This that is glorious in his apparel, traveling in the greatness of his strength? I that speak in righteousness, mighty to save. Wherefore art thou red in thine apparel, and thy garments like him that treadeth in the wine vat? I have trodden the winepress alone,
Yes.
and of the people there was none with me. For I will tread them in mine anger, and trample them in my fury. Their blood shall be sprinkled with my garments, and I shall stain all my raiment. For the day of vengeance is in mine heart, and the year of my redeem is come. And I looked, and there was none to help, and I wondered that there was none to uphold. Therefore mine own arm brought salvation unto me, and my fury it upheld me. And I will tread down the people in mine anger, and make them drunk in my fury, and I will bring down their strength to the earth.
All right, I think that's deal with the blood, the cloth, dip in the blood. But let's look at Revelation 1 and verse 16, because we were talking about the sword from the mouth, right? Let's look at Revelation 1 and verse 16. Read that for us.
1 and verse 16 said,
Yes.
And he had in his right hand 7 stars, and out of his mouth went a sharp two-edged sword, and his countenance was as the sun shineth in his strength. All
right, very good. So this same person in Revelation 1:16 is here clearly saying that Jesus himself is now ready to execute judgment upon the earth. Also, it says, it continues to say in verse 16, it's about the rod of the, mine, I'm missing something here. It should have been the rod of iron, right? Yes. Oh, sorry, my bad. Let me give it a reference for that. The rod of iron. I'm trying to remember where exactly I had seen that before. It's in the Old Testament. Give me a second there. Let me see, rod of iron. All right, I'll come back to that. Okay, let us look at Revelation. Look at Revelation 2:27. Somebody can look at Revelation 2:27. Somebody else look at Revelation 12:5. And somebody else could look at Psalms 2 and verse 9 and see if we pick it up there.
Okay. Revelation 2:27 said, And he shall rule them with a rod of iron.
Yes.
As the vessels of a potter shall they be broken to shivers.
Yes.
Even as I received of my Father.
Beautiful. Let us read Revelation 12:5 now.
Okay, so 12:5 says, And she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God and to his throne.
Beautiful. Look at Psalms 2 and verse 9. Tell me, what does that say? Psalms 2 and verse 9.
Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel.
All right. So John is utilizing some familiar word in here to describe Jesus here in a particular way. It mentioned in verse 16, well, the latter part of verse 15 continues and says, He has tread the winepress of the wine of the anger of the wrath of God Almighty. And verse 16 says, And he had his robe and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. We hear that before, don't? That's a classification given to God. And why you think he's given this classification now in chapter 19? We would have looked at previous chapter and see now where John is saying he is heading to earth, he is with his army, and he is now he is now officially given this name, King of Kings, Lord of Lords. Why? Yes, so the devil is ruling the earth, and so he's going to conquer him. So he's the King of Kings, and he's the Lord of Lords. Was it the same chapter that says he had many crowns? Is it strange for God to have many crowns? Yes or no? Why it is no? Who said no? Why you say no? If you give me an answer, you have to tell me why. Why it is not strange. How many crowns you know of God have? Jesus have. How many crowns you know him have? And a crown that, a title that. How many crowns him have? And if you say it's not strange, let me read the text. It's verse what it is, where it is. Let me see. Verse 17 says, and I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried out with a loud voice, saying, all the birds flying in the midst of heaven, come gather for the great supper of God. So listen what is happening. Listen the process now. John see heaven open. John see Christ leave with heaven with his angels. The robe that he is wearing was dipped in the blood, even though it is not yet dipped. He's seen where he's followed by the other angels. He's seen with the fact that his mouth has a sharp-edged sword from it, and he's going to rule because with a rod of iron, because he's going to conquer, King of Kings, Lord of Lords. Now the birds are invited to come because now there will be feast for them. So imagine in your mind Christ coming from heaven with a host of army, full white, coming, and an angel in the midst, beckoning to the birds, the scavengers, in the midst heaven, come gather to the Lord's Supper. It's a great supper, that you may eat the flesh of the commanders, kings rather, commanders, everybody, strong, weak, everyone, free man, slave, small, great. And I saw the beast, now verse 19, and the kings of the earth, and their armies gathered to make war against the one sitting on the horse and his army. So everything set. And so picture now Christ coming with his army. Earth, the men, the armies, the kings, everybody set, preparing for him, ready. And in the process, the birds are invited to come. Because anyway, take it, enough dead people going left. So the birds will have a feast. So look at it now. Yes, Sister Rose. This is the Armageddon. This is the Armageddon. This is the final war. Final war. This is the final war.
Final war. Is the birds symbolic?
Yes.
And if it is, what's the symbol?
Yes, the birds are symbolic in the sense that it's not so much saying in where you would have seen in the Old Testament, I think it was in Ezekiel, that actually the birds would actually eat the flesh, literally, of persons who died, but to symbolize the fact that there will be a lot of persons going into Christ-left graves. So let me see if we can find a symbolization for the birds here in terms of what they...
Yeah, but if you
well, the statement here is really depicting not so much, but more looking at the fact that... let's just turn to kings. Let's look at kings for some
My next
answer.
question would be, what does the Battle of Armageddon looks like?
All right, we're gonna look at that. So this said the statement reflects an ancient Near Eastern post-combat scene, disposing one's body to the birds and animal for food signify total defeat and shameful humiliation. So that is really what the birds would symbolize here. So, but let's just look at Deuteronomy 28 and verse 26 and see if we can see some contrast here. So, as you rightly said, as you asked the question, it's not so much a literal, the birds eating the flesh, but more symbolize a defeat and shameful, the fact that when a body is left out there. All right, let me give an example. You remember the prophet that when the Lord said, a young prophet, when God sent him on a mission, and God gave him an instruction not to stop and eat. You remember that prophet? When he disobeyed and he was killed, what happened to him? His body was left in the road. And it was the purpose of his body left in the street was to show a humiliation of what happened to him. The fact that it was a clear sign that he disobeyed the instruction given, and it was a shameful death. So with the fact that his body left out in the road was so shameful that the false prophet, what did he do? I think I don't remember if birds started to eat him or the lion. No? And left him. That's it, and bury him. But the fact that he was left in the road was a sign of a shameful death. So in this case, it is symbolizing that too. Well, let us examine a few texts. Deuteronomy 28, 26. Who have that one? And we can look at 1 Samuel 17, 44. Somebody can look at that. Another person can look at 1 Kings 14, 11. Somebody put up their hands and take the mic. Deuteronomy 28, 26. Sister Lee here.
Yeah,
1 Samuel 17, 44. And somebody can look for 1 Kings 14, 11. Yes.
Deuteronomy 28, verse 26.
Yes.
Says, and thy carcass shall be meat unto all fowls of the air, and unto the beasts of the earth, and no man shall fray them away.
All right. Let us look at 1 Samuel 17 and verse 44. I think the real text is in Ezekiel, so I will get there. Who have that? You have that text? 1 Samuel 17, 44. Sister Hyman, you have it? You have Kings? All right, make Sister Hyman read Kings.